Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. We're waking up with watches and everything you see is in stock and for sale. So reach out to Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase and pricing inquiries. All right, last year's star from Omega. This is the CK2998 inspired first Omega in space, dedicated to the first Omega watch, privately owned, by the way, that flew in space. So the timepiece is very true to the CK2998, but there are some changes compared to the original tribute watch from 2012. The first Omega in space, the first time around, used caliber 1861. This is the new 3861. A lot of changes. We'll go over those in a moment, but let's talk about the aesthetics. What you may not be able to tell on the webcam is that you're actually looking at a very dark blue sunburst dial. And then we have elements that are designed to evoke age. So we have Fotina, but the color of the dial base is really the most gripping part of this, and I don't know how visible that is through the lens. Another thing worth mentioning is that this watch does feature a bubble-like sapphire, but it is a sapphire, so don't mistake that for plexi. It's designed to evoke a plexi. The watch, being part of the CK2998 profile series, has a 39.7mm case. You can see there are no crown guards, there are no lyre-style lugs, they're squared off, the mid-case is very thin. So this is not just a vintage evocative watch, it is very true to scale. We don't have solid end links either, so that 47.8 lug-to-lug is the total distance across the wrist. Case back, hippocampus, you could see the date that the first privately owned moon watch flew. There it is right there. First Omega in space. FOIS. That's what FOIS means if you've seen that online on Omega forums. The movement does have some refinements. For one, it is now a coaxial master chronometer. So it has the coaxial escapement. It's been through the master chronometer test. It's almost immune to magnetism. It now has a little bit more power reserve at 50 hours. And if I pull the crown out, you can see another feature that you didn't have on an old moon watch, hacking seconds. Still distantly Lamagna based, now free sprung, a lot tougher overall and a better timekeeper. It is a certified chronometer that goes above and beyond the COSC, since master chronometer is a standard for the entire watch, not just the movement. We've got a couple of vintage Omega logos. You can see the marquee up on the dial, a flat link style vintage inspired bracelet. We've got that vintage Omega logo on the clasp. But make no mistake, the clasp itself is modern and features a refinement recently added just about across the Omega range. If you don't have a dive watch with some sort of extension already fit, there is now this micro adjustment that is push button and sliding, allowing you to move the bracelet in or out to fine tune the fit. We'll throw it on my wrist. I'm going to shut up for a second, give you a good look at it. Maybe from this angle you might see the blue of the dial a little bit better, but it's a great looking watch, and it is technically and aesthetically a cut above that original FOIS from 2012. It really does look like an aged CK2998 with the color only popping when you get closer. We'll do a quick lume shot. If you have any doubt about the luminescence of Fotina, that should assuage your fears. A really great watch, and because it is so short lug to lug, actually a watch that wears well on both male and female wrists. Let's take a look at a Holy Trinity sports watch, how the other half lives. If you want to go full bracelet and you have the budget to match, we'll actually go through all three of the Holy Trinity, starting with Vacheron and Constantin. So this is a third generation overseas self-winding. In late 2020 for the 2021 model year, Vacheron launched this combination of rose gold, and this is really red gold, 5N right here, and then this lovely lustrous blue dial. The dial is actually a combination of lacquer and a metallic disc underneath it. It is very well loomed, blue by day, blue by night, easy to distinguish. Screw down crown, 150 meters water resistant, 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetic. It is beautifully made and it feels very robust in the hand. It does wear a little bit large compared to something like a Royal Oak. I would say compared to a 15-510, it's similar, but it feels more massive. It's that lug to lug. You can see how the bracelet has a little bit of rigidity. You can't push it straight down. The watch comes with two straps, one rubber, one in leather. So if you want it to wear a little bit smaller, put it on the rubber strap in particular, but this is one of the best bracelets in the business. First, there's the intricacy of the finishing. Second, there's the simple fact that every single link is removable, and so you have the ability to really fine-tune the fit here by removing links. Each side of the clasp features a 1.5mm sleeved micro adjustment, so you've got that flexibility too. And of course, what good are extra straps. If you can't easily attach them, you can easily detach the bracelet. There's a quick release system built in. A large movement manufacturer, properly sized for the case, 2 barrels, 60-hour power reserve, Geneva seal, 5-position adjustment. A handsome movement in every regard. And again, Vacheron's own. Prior to the 3rd generation overseas, you could never see the movement, and in any case, it wasn't Vacheron's. Now, with the 5100 you see here, VC has something to show off. Geneva seal is both movement and case. Both have to live up to the standard. Since about 2012, it has been a full watch standard. Throw it on the wrist. It's got a lot of heft. As I mentioned, the bracelet balances the watch. So if you like to wear your watch loose, consider keeping it on the bracelet. The watch has a really great look, and I'd say 15 centimeters circumference if your wrist is flat across the top. If your wrist is more round, some people have round wrists, then I would say 16 centimeters circumference wrists and up. Mine is 16, but it's flat across the top. A really great look, and probably the best all-around integrated bracelet sports watch. Yes, even compared to some of the independents, there's a lot of value here. Audemars Piguet sort of threads the needle between the worlds of the dress watch and the sports watch, and the Code 1159 came out in 2019, and it did that rather rapidly. Well, there was one problem with that charter year, which was that the automatic and the chronograph had these monotone dials that looked flat and cheap, even though they were actually quite expensive and well made. What was the solution? Color. And you can see it here. A gradient fade from burgundy to black in lacquer, white gold hands, numerals, indices, and another feature that was new for 2020, as they added these colored dials, they also added a date disc that had a font to actually match the rest of the fonts on the dial. So that was a minor oversight of the 2019 models, which in hindsight make the 2019s kind of collectible, but a lot of people would prefer these later and more refined variants. One thing the Code always had going for it, it was thinner than you expect. 10.8 millimeters thick, but they've always been broad at about 50 millimeters lug to lug. They've always sort of worn like sports watches, despite being 41 millimeters and fairly thin. You can see this is white gold, but that 50 millimeter lug-to-lug dimension means it spans my wrist pretty definitively. Taking a look in profile, it actually looks thicker than it is, but look at that crystal, look at the complexity of its curvature. This watch was just full of nuance when it came out, and people don't give it enough credit for that. The lugs, you can see how they're open and they're evacuated, they're interior beveled. We have this mid case that's a rounded octagon, a tribute to the Royal Oak. Then we have these little screws that fix the bars that hold the strap to the case, and you can see those are hexagonal, and they actually are a reference to the bolts on the bezel of the Royal Oak. And this watch has a model-specific buckle that is also fixed by screws and bars, so a lot of security there. Taking a look at the profile, you can see just how white this case is. AP is one of the few watchmakers that still likes a platinum-like silver blaze to its white gold, so it does rhodium plate these, and it creates a look that is indistinguishable from platinum. Again, you can see the refraction pattern of this uncommonly shaped sapphire, and the result is that the watch looks like nothing else from most angles. Another really interesting refinement that's easy to miss here is that the lugs only joined the case at the bezel. So let me see if I can do this. Every once in a while, if I have a really thin piece of paper, I can slide it in between the lug. No, I need a thinner piece of paper to do this, but I'll get as close as I can. If you look really closely, you can see that the lugs are not actually attached to the case back. So this is a watch with a lot of refinement and a lot to love. The movement's properly large, 32 millimeters in diameter. Now a 70-hour power reserve, full balance bridge, free-sprung Gyromax style balance, a 22-carat rotor. That's actually the best finished part of the whole watch. You can see all these interior bevels. And then the Coats Farms, the Audemars and Piguet families, to remind you that AP is the oldest Swiss watchmaker continuously owned and run by the founding family since 1875. So this is going to be their 150th year. Good year to buy an Audemars Piguet. That said, I'm more of a Patek guy, and this is one of my favorite series. Launched in 1992 and made in only 1,000 pieces in white gold. This is the reference 5000G. It is often described as an automotive-inspired watch, with the references being 1950s Porsche, Jaguar, Brit cars like Triumph and MG, Mercedes-Benz, and it really does have the look of the radially arrayed numerals with the center register that you find on a automotive dashboard. It's all white on black with a matte black dial, white gold case. These are often described as 34 and 33 millimeters. Well, they're both wrong. I measured it 33.5. Don't be put off by that, though, because this series, which spans the 5000 seen here all the way to the current 6007, has always had very strong lug profiles, and we have those here. So even though the lugs are only 41.8 millimeters across the wrist, it's 41.8 lug to lug, it has a lot of presence. And because this is one of the few simple Patek Philippe watches that features the caliber 240 micro rotor, it's super thin at only 7.9 millimeters thick. And on the reverse side, you can see the micro rotor. Now, this is often reserved for flagship pieces and high complications. In general, a Calatrava this simple would get a 215 manual wind, or if it got an automatic, it would get a center rotor automatic. So this was always very special, having an automatic that's super thin. And you can see the rotor and the winding system in the barrel are all in the same plane as the rest of the mechanism, keeping it thin. Also, unlike a center rotor, you don't have a rotor bridge and a rotor to block your view of the works. It even includes a full clasp. And the watch is just a lovely piece. 1992 release, 1000 made, highly collectible these days. The 5000 is the kind of watch that always elicits a smile. It's not a watch about pomp and circumstance or ego. It's great on a male or female wrist. It's all about appreciation for history, quality, and continuity. Because, again, in the form of the 6007, this case shape is still with us today. So that's our holy trinity. We had Vacheron, AP, and Patek Philippe. Now let's jump back to a watch that's sort of the heart and soul of the Swiss watch industry, Omega. It is always easy to get wrapped up in the Seamasters and the Speedmasters and forget that the DeVille is the most experimental Omega collection. Remember, it was the DeVille that first debuted the coaxial escapement. It was the DeVille that received a jump hour. It was the DeVille that received the Hour Vision case in 2007, a case with sapphire viewing ports inserted into the flanks, so you could see what was then the new caliber 8500 family. You could see how intricate these lugs are, the integration of the sapphire case flanks. Now, it's a 41 millimeter watch, but on the dial side, it actually looks like it might be larger because the dial is big and the bezel is small. We have this lovely set of gadroons that race around underneath these faceted, polished, and satinated indices, giving it a very Art Deco vibe. The hands are satinated on their top, but micro-polished on their flanks, and it's an annual calendar with a month and a date, meaning you only need to make one correction a year during the jump from February to March. The annual calendar debuted on, you guessed it, the DeVilles. Around back, you can see the movement, the 8601, 60 hours of power reserve, coaxial, anti-shock, courtesy of a full balance bridge and a free sprung balance, and courtesy of the SI14 silicone hairspring, anti-magnetic as well. Now on the wrist, it wears fairly large only because here the strap is very substantial and it's not broken in. Don't be fooled, you can wear this watch on a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference. This may be my favorite Omega of all time. It is certainly a watch I've thought about in the past, and what you might not realize is even though the DeVille is considered to be a dress style, these are 100 meters water resistant. So on a different strap, you've got a very viable all-arounder. And in steel with a sapphire case, you have something unlike any Rolex or any Breitling, that's for sure. Omega is very clear about its identity. The coaxial escapement is still probably the most sophisticated movement you can buy for under $50,000. A double quickset system, hacking seconds, and just an awesome watch. One of my all-time favorites with the blue dial and the steel case, about as good as any Hour Vision has ever gotten. But let's say you want something that's even more approachable. Well, here we go. Launched in 2021 and made in 844 pieces, we have the TAG Heuer Aquaracer Professional 300. So 844 pieces, the idea being that this watch has an aesthetic inspired by the Heuer 1978 Model 844 diver. So we've got a ceramic bezel insert with a sort of lapping machine radial brushed satin finish, much like you'd find on a 70s watch. The case, the bracelet, it's all media blasted titanium, a finish I like because if it ever goes expect, be refinished, it just gets blasted again. It doesn't get worn down by a wheel. It's not a big watch, but it's not a small watch. As you can see, 43 millimeters, but with pivoted end links, it's only about as broad as it is lug to lug, just over 48 millimeters. And when you throw it on the wrist, it's not super thick either. That's because of the Sellita movement inside. Caliber 5 being a Sellita SW200. You can see it's fairly thin, and surprisingly so. The watch features the Aquaracer's characteristic polygonal bezel, but then if you look at the indices on the dial, you can see those two have the same profile. It's a lovely metallic matte green that looks fantastic and will probably age better than most green dials of recent years. It also has a rather sophisticated incremental adjustment system. So if you just want to fine tune the fit, you can do that. If you want to pull it out all the way to use over a dive suit, you can do that as well. And you can actually use the system to make adjustments when the watch is on the wrist, which is important for something that could be used in deep waters of a marine environment. You don't want to have to take your dive watch off to make changes because you might drop it. Thanks to that little adjustment system, you do not have to take it off. The bezel is really chunky, a super crisp 60-click action. No shortage of lume, in fact, probably quite a bit more than you expect, with the mint hand in blue so you can instantly recognize it and read it against the bezel. Note all three hands are lumed, which I like to see on a dive watch because you really should know if your dive timer is running, and that ensures you will know. Plus, the bezel is fully luminescent with the 5-minute marks clearly denoted, as well as the first 15 minutes clearly defined minute by minute. A lot to love here. You can see the image of the diver's helmet on the back, and of course the diver's helmet with the polygonal motif repeating again and again. You can see it all over the helmet, but then also the base behind. No, it is not bee-themed, even though we do have a honeycomb. A lovely watch and an easy one to wear, all in titanium. Finally, this is the ultimate piece in today's episode. I always save the best for last, or at least what I think is the best for last. This is a rose gold 3357, a Breguet model originally launched in 1988, just as Daniel Roth was finishing his work with Breguet. It uses a La Manna movement that he designed for La Manna and then bought back to use in Breguet watches. So in a lot of ways, this is a true Daniel Roth watch designed and made. Taking a look at the case, it's the less common rose gold. There's a lot of these in yellow, few in rose. It features cold rolled and hand finished coining, welded lugs, strap fixed to the case by bars and screws, a dial made of solid gold cut on an engine and then silvered. And if you look, there's this lovely elevated bridge that serves as a subdial for the running seconds, and we have a 1-minute tourbillon with a blued tri-spoke. It has an overcoil. It is a 2.5 hertz beat rate, and then underneath you can see just how tall and beautifully decorated those columns are bearing the tourbillon. This is the same tourbillon base the La Manna 387 used in the later Daniel Roth C187 tourbillon when he launched the Daniel Roth brand. And taking a quick look, you can see that the inner face, the case, is mirror polished, and that the base plate has been beautifully freehand engraved. And it continues on the back. Breguet calls this the caliber 558, manual wind, 50-hour power reserve, 6-position adjustment. Look at all of this hand engraving. Oh, and by the way, we do have internal mirrored bevels here. We have polished screw heads. All the characters, the letters, and the numerals have been freehand engraved. Really, the only part that is not freehand engraved, the little note of June 26th, 1801, which was Tourbillon Day, the day Breguet's tourbillon was finally patented. We have little images of, I guess, gusts of wind or cloud. We have a much more obvious floral motif with the bloom of the flower, and it is gorgeous, beyond belief. This is a 3357. When you see 7 at the end of the reference of a Breguet watch from this period, it means a display case back, and it usually means a display case back with freehand engraving. A timepiece that is entirely handmade. You can see it has pre-August 1st, 1995 hallmarks on the case flank. So this is a very collectible watch. This era of Breguet, I don't know why I've had a couple of them lately. We might have bought out a guy who only collects this type of watch, because I've been lucky enough to see some of the landmark pieces from this era. But still, even by those standards, this watch is rare. If you love it, and I can't see why you wouldn't, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.